The biggest disaster in professional sports history. Damn. In 1974, Gary L. Davidson saw an opportunity to challenge the NFL. He would fail, badly, but it's a story worth exploring. We're talking about the World Football League, whose stated goal was to bring football onto the world stage, but the furthest it got was Hawaii, and the league folded a year and a half into its existence. So what's the story behind this bizarre league and how did it turn into such a failure? Well, it was originally the brainchild of Gary L. Davidson, a lawyer and businessman. He'd previously helped create two other sports leagues, the American Basketball Association and the World Hockey Association. Some of the teams from those leagues joined the NBA and NHL, so you could see why he might be motivated to challenge the NFL. He had some previous success, but that wouldn't be the case with the WFL. The NFL definitely wasn't the powerhouse it is today, and with the player strikes in 1974, businessman that he was, saw an opportunity. To start the WFL, Gary needed money from investors. At a press conference on October 2nd, 1973, he announced his main investors, who he called the Founding Fathers. One of the most important of these men was John F. Bassett, a Canadian movie producer, and Bassett was actually thinking of starting his own football league when he met Gary. One of the biggest things that Bassett did was sign some key NFL players. In Gary Davison's own words, the players signed to the league were, quote, pro rejects. The average NFL salary at the time was among the lowest in the major sport leagues, and that was in part what motivated the strikes in 1974. And it was what enabled some WFL teams to sign NFL players. They offered bigger contracts. So Bassett, who was the owner of Toronto Northmen, signed three Miami Dolphin players, Larry Sonka, Jim Kick, and Paul Warfield, to what was then the richest three-player deal in sports history, $3.5 million to start in 1975. And that was guaranteed money, so if the WFL failed, they would have still got paid. Before the start of the first season, the WFL claimed to have signed about 60 NFL players, but those were future contracts, so players would have to finish the contract in the NFL and then join the WFL. For example, Kenny Stabler was to play with the Raiders until 1975 and then join Birmingham in 1976, and that wouldn't happen because the league folded in 1975. So despite the league only being around for about a year and a half, there is quite a lot of stuff that went on. But I want to approach this story from the financial side. The WFL isn't the only football league that has failed, and I was intrigued to find why these leagues can't seem to gain any long-term success. And as you'll see from this story, finances had a huge part to play in being one of the primary killers. So let's look at the two seasons of the WFL and how money played a huge role in its downfall. In the first few weeks, the WFL looked like a great success. Attendance outpaced the first week of the AFL in 1960, which averaged about 43,000 a game, but this was the first chink in the armor. The Jacksonville Sharks admitted that out of the approximately 106,000 fans who attended their first two games, 30,000 got in for free. The Philadelphia Bells admitted that 100,000 of the 120,000 in attendance at their first two home games had got the tickets for free or at a major discount, and these stories hurt the credibility of the league almost instantly. Money problems also plagued the league from the start. Many of the teams had paid less than the original $120,000 franchise fee, and due diligence definitely had not been done, so a lot of these teams were undercapitalized. They didn't have enough money to sustain the operation. And to really emphasize that there was no due diligence done, the Blazers' part owner, Romy Loud, had financed the team through selling cocaine and tax evasion. So basic team expenses couldn't be met. If the players aren't happy or motivated, you're going to struggle to find success, obviously. For example, the Birmingham Americans were not paid for the last 2 months of the season. The Florida Blazers went 3 months without pay and apparently survived on McDonald's meal vouchers. Some teams had to use school buses for transportation because they couldn't afford proper travel. The Philadelphia Bells even got mistaken for a high school team when they arrived at a stadium in a school bus. The Wheels and Sharks were shut down after 14 games. They just didn't have enough money to keep going, and Mr. Gary Davison was forced to step down, and he was actually replaced by Hawaiians owner Christopher Hemmeter. The playoffs were just as strange. The Hornets, which were the second place team in the Eastern Division, earned the right to host a playoff game, but because they didn't have good ticket sales, they had to drop out of the postseason entirely, which then allowed the third place Bells to take their spot. And even the World Bowl, which was their version of the Super Bowl, had problems. The Birmingham Americans owed $237 in federal taxes, and it looked like it would stop the game, but the IRS said, go ahead, you just need to give us a portion of the revenue from the ticket sales. Don't think it was a very good deal for the IRS. And the Birmingham Americans uniforms were literally taken away from them after the game to pay off their debts. The league lost about $20 million in their first season. The Hawaiians had lost $3.2 million. The New York Stars, who changed to the Charlotte Hornets, no connection to the NBA team obviously, had over $2 million of debt against $94,000 in assets. And the Jacksonville Sharks and Detroit Wheels were liquidated, owing nearly $4 million. I mean, somehow these guys managed to go another season, and to try and help with the financial health of the league, players and coaches were going to be paid on percentage of revenues. But obviously that doesn't really mean much if revenue isn't very high. Also, given the fact only two teams, which were Memphis and Philadelphia, returned with the same ownership from the prior season, the WFL was described to be basically a completely different league to what it was the year before. Despite the new plans that were implemented, the teams still couldn't make money, and that was partly due to the abysmal attendance numbers. The WFL averaged about 21,000 fans per game in 1974, which dropped to 14,000 in 1975. So in October, a few days after the start of week 13, the WFL shut down operations. Hemeta said it would cost up to $40 million over 2 years for the league to work, and he and the other decision makers didn't feel like it was justified to keep going. By the time the league folded, they were over $10 million in debt. So as you can see, the financial troubles were a big reason the league couldn't sustain itself. Running a football team is obviously expensive. It requires major financial backing to cover expenses like player salaries, venue rentals, marketing, operational costs. And you're probably going to have to operate at a loss for a few years until you can attract enough fans to generate the kind of revenue that you need to run a successful team. But if you can't even run a team successfully for 1 year, the league's never going to work out. The WFL couldn't get a big TV deal either, so each team only received about $80,000 to $100,000 from their TV contract, which wasn't going to be enough to cover expenses. The TV deal they got was about $1.5 million. To give you a comparison, the NFL had a TV contract in the mid-60s for about $14 million. I couldn't find the exact number the NFL contract was worth in 1974 and 1975, but we can see it was about 10 to 15x more than what the WFL got. You obviously also had a lack of player talent, and that is in part a money thing. As we saw, plenty of teams couldn't even pay their players, and they didn't have a good funnel for talent, so that's only going to reduce overall interest with fans because it means less ticket sales, merch, etc. Essentially money, right? The story of the WFL is a tale of financial mess, and a whole lot more. Alright, thanks for watching.